I knew a famous lady called Mary Seton. She was, you might say, a great devotee of Satyajit's filmmaking. She had been of Eisenstein, the Russian filmmakers, and she was also writing a book on Ray and his films. And I knew her from Delhi, and she met me on the road and introduced me to the great man Satyajit Ray.
I'm delighted to be with India's best-loved English writer, who's probably also India's most prolific writer, and the only writer I know who's been writing non-stop for over 7 decades. Starting with his debut novel, The Room on the Roof, and continuing with stories such as The Blue Umbrella, The Night Train at Deoli, his wonderful verses, his insightful essays, his autobiographical book, Lone Fox Dancing and Beyond. Tell us about P.C. Wren.
P.C. Wren, it's forgotten now, but he was a big name back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Now, when I was at school and a bookworm, when I was in charge of the school library, I read everything there. And of course, one of the books I came across, it was a bestseller in its time. It was called Beau Geste by P.C. Wren. He'd written several bestsellers, Beau Geste, Beau Sabre and others. They'd been filmed. They were set in the French Foreign Legion, you know, and they were adventure stories with a bit of romance in them. Well written and very successful. And I read some of them, and it was only many years later that I discovered actually P.C. Wren was in the Indian Educational Service, and he'd written a grammar book in collaboration with somebody called Martin. And it became as Wren and Martin's book of English grammar. And hardly anybody knew that Wren was actually P.C. Wren who'd written all those best-selling novels. And I think the grammar book outlasted the novels anyway, because it was still being used in the 1950s and 60s.
It's still being used.
Is it still being used?
Yeah,
Amazing.
Yeah. I think it's the only grammar book in India, it seems to be, because I think generations of school children have dreaded its red cover. So.
Right, I remember it too at school. But I don't think it's used anywhere else in the world. It's exclusively... but it gives you a good foundation, actually. Although it's a bit boring.
I was quite daunted by the book when I had it in school, and because of that, I don't know the terms for the grammar rules, because I never read my Wren and Martin.
But P.C. Wren, the novel I remember best of his was called The Snake and the Sword, and it was about an army officer who's very brave, but he's terrified of snakes. He's got a phobia about snakes, and how he overcomes that phobia. And I remember that novel better than the other ones. So he was a very successful novelist. So I'm not sure if he wrote the grammar book before he became a famous novelist. It must have been, because once he was famous, why would he bother to write a grammar book?
That's true. Just to terrorize school children for generations to come.
Right. Yeah. In the Foreign Legion, he was terrorizing Arabs in North Africa, and in the grammar book he was terrifying.
And he was never in the Foreign Legion, right, himself?
No, he wasn't. He imagined it all.
Yeah.
He imagined it all.
Okay.
I think it would have been quite different if in the Foreign Legion. But he romanticized it.
Yeah, yeah.
It consisted of people who had tragic love affairs, and they went in, to get over it, they went and joined the Foreign Legion.
Something that you were talking to me, that you had gone to Darjeeling and you had witnessed a shoot of Satyajit Ray's film.
Yes.
Could you just tell us about that?
It was an interesting experience, and it was about 1960, 61, and I was a nobody then as far as being a writer goes. I was done a lot of writing, but I wasn't particularly well known, and I was working for an organization called CARE. We were helping Tibetan refugees, which took me to Darjeeling. But anyway, I knew a famous lady called Mary Seton. She was, you might say, a great devotee of Satyajit's filmmaking. She had been of Eisenstein, the Russian filmmakers, and she was also writing a book on Ray and his films. And I knew her from Delhi, and she met me on the road and introduced me to the great man Satyajit Ray. Of course, he was busy shooting on, so we just exchanged a few pleasantries. But he was staying in this, we were all staying in the same hotel. He was there with his crew. I was staying in that hotel, the Everest Hotel, and so was the well-known Bollywood actor Shammi Kapoor, who was making a film called Professor. And these were two films with totally different styles of filmmaking, you know. So there was Ray doing a sort of realistic film on the roads of Darjeeling, and the Shammi Kapoor film, I had the pleasure of seeing a song and dance acted on the railway lines just outside the railway station, a little toy train. And I did not meet Shammi Kapoor, but I did meet and brief talk to his very gracious wife, Geeta Bali, who had also been an actress in her time.
Yeah.
She wasn't acting then, she wasn't keeping well, but she seemed a very nice person. And that was it. It was an interesting experience. And later, when I came back to Delhi, a month or two later, and I met Mary Seton again, and I said, it was nice meeting you in Darjeeling, Mary Seton. And she said, but I was never in Darjeeling. I've now just written a story called Doppelganger, in which I have Mary Seton in two places at the same time.
Wow. Look forward to reading that. There's a verse that you wrote which mentions Shakespeare. It's at the grave of John Mildenhall.
Yes, I wrote that when I lived in Delhi in the 60s and I visited Agra. And there's an old cemetery there attached to the old Agra Catholic Cathedral. And there are a lot of old graves there, Armenian graves, and people who came to the court of Akbar and from foreigners in that time. And John Mildenhall's grave is the grave of the first Englishman that exists in North India. There would perhaps be older ones in the South. So I wrote that little poem, I think, on the occasion. I have a photograph of it somewhere.
Akbar is saying that I hear of a poet called Shakespeare who, though not as good as Fazl or Faiz, writes a pretty line and does plays on the side.
Yeah.
That's from your poem.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Abul Fazl, wasn't that? He was a poet of that time.
Yes.
It's amazing how little we know about him.
Yeah.
And yet we know more about his contemporaries. So did he deliberately try to cover up or use a pen name? Pen names. Some writers used, have throughout history, used pseudonyms or pen names, like Mark Twain. He was, what was he?
Samuel Clemens.
Clemens, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And O. Henry also used he was something Porter. That's because he'd been 5 years in jail, I think.
and Ellery Queen was two people.
Two people, yeah. Two people.
Then Saki.
Saki is H.H. Munro.
H.H. Munro.
He had an unusual end. It was World War I, and he was an officer in the trenches, and he was standing up in a trench lighting a cigarette, and somebody shouted out, "Put out that cigarette!" And at that moment, a bullet hit him.
Yeah.
That's the story, anyway. Yeah. Like a Saki story.
Right.
He spent some time, I think, in the East. Or was that George Orwell? Because George Orwell
was born
in Motihari in Bihar.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Bond, thank you very much. It was.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. You made me talk. Normally, I'm a very silent person.
I'm really, really fortunate that You opened up and you were very, very sporting about it.
I am the English nut. Bye for now.
I'm the English nut. Bye for now. I have a special announcement to make for the fans of Ruskin Bond, which is the launch of a new venture called the Ruskin Bond Collections, which consists of signed copies of his books, combinations of different books, books with objects like this lovely stuffed toy.
Timothy the Tiger Cub.
Timothy the Tiger Cub. So you're going to find all this and more if you go to www.ruskinbond.in.